Excellent. Welcome, everybody. I'm Xavier Martin, Deputy Director at the Digital Frontiers, and I will be moderating this panel today. This morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, I have the pleasure of introducing Ana Maria Prieto Ariza, Payment System Director at the Banco de la República, the Central Bank of Colombia, who has recently been working quite a lot on promoting more inclusive payments in the country. We also have today with us Nithyasri Sharma, a strategy manager at the Women's World Banking, an organization with an exceptional track record on promoting digital financial service that work for women in many African, Asian, and Latin American countries. Next to Nithya, at least on my screen, we have the pleasure of having Jacqueline Jumah, a technical expert on inclusive digital payments at African Enda, an independent African-led organization created to accelerate the growth of instant and inclusive payment systems. And last but not least, we are very happy to have also with us today Camilo Tellez, Deputy Management Director at the Better Than Cash Alliance, a UN-based global partnership of governments, companies, and international organizations accelerating the transition from cash to responsible digital payments to help to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Ana Maria, Nithya, Jacqueline, Camilo, welcome to the Pathway 17 Summit. Bienvenidos. So today we're going to talk about the gender intentionality in payment systems. No? What it means to make payments more inclusive for women. What is their significance for financial inclusion, and what are the challenges or barriers that we can identify to their growth? I'm going to start out with a few questions of my own for our panelists, but we're very interested in hearing from you in the audience. So please be thinking about the comments and questions you might have and leave them in the chat. The chat is in the right bottom corner of your screen. Leave them there, and we will be sure to address to our panel these questions from you, from the audience. So Jacqueline, let me maybe start with you. Before joining African Enda, you spent more than a decade working in the digital finance space, working in payments, digitization, conducting research, and working as a consultant. You have a very deep understanding of how payments can foster financial inclusion. Could you share a little bit with us some of your views on why payments matter when we talk about financial inclusion?
Well, thank you, Xavier. Sure. Payments, especially retail instant payments, are integral to our daily lives. And they're usually the first and typically most often used financial service, actually. These payments are instrumental because they allow liquidity to be captured in a real time, which in this day and age is a basic requirement for in our kinds of lifestyles. So by allowing this real-time accessibility to liquidity, it helps in avoiding some cash flow issues at household level and even at the MSME level, because access to real-time cash, access to liquidity enables the businesses to be nimbler, therefore promoting financial inclusion. And then when you look at it also from what we are all trying to do here in terms of promoting the wide adoption of payments, there are several important effects at the country level and even regionally and globally. So if I may just look at what some of these financial inclusion efforts are gearing towards, is not only to benefit those that will become eventually financially included, but also for, the efforts are beneficial to the national payments infrastructure and ultimately the economies or the global economy. Because, for instance, as an excluded individual, just receiving payments into an account, a formal account, could be a catalyst for using other formal financial instruments. So you can't talk about financial inclusion without actually acknowledging the contributions done by payments.
Thank you, Jacqueline. No, I like that. No, payments as a gateway for other more maybe transformative financial products and services. That's great. Let me turn it to Ana Maria. Ana Maria, you are a payment system director at the Central Bank of Colombia. No? As I understand, you are working right now in the deployment of a new instant payment system. So from your experience, how important is the involvement of the central bank and the government in facilitating that collaboration necessary to build more inclusive and interoperable payment systems that works for women too?
Thank you, Javier, and thank you, everyone. Very excited to join this panel. Yes, I mean, payment systems are becoming an essential development tool for everyone. It is absolutely important in terms that they increase economic competitiveness, accelerate business development, and unlock financial inclusion. Central banks and governments in general can help to ensure that that payment infrastructure is working efficiently, to have that more faster, cheaper, and more convenient. But we do need to do this together with the private sector, because it's them and not the authorities, the ones that are reaching that last mile users. So this is like a win-win relationship, a very collaborative landscape in which private sector can actually deploy innovation, plug in new services, make sure that they can tailor the needs through very specific products and new payment services for those customers and communities that we are still not reaching. And central bankers and governments can, provide the payment rails and the clearing and settlement services as public goods, so that everyone can come in and have a participation in this more open and more competitive landscape.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Let me turn to Nithya. You also have worked extensively in digital finance innovation, particularly on initiatives focused on closing the considerable gap between men and women in access to finance and technology. So what are the main barriers for women to financial inclusion? Why is building more inclusive payment systems for women relevant as a social goal?
Absolutely. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. So we see barriers for women on three different dimensions, right? So the first dimension is at the demand level or the client level. She has low awareness of solutions that are available to her in the market. Primarily, she has low financial and digital literacy. She's not comfortable using this type of technology. She lacks the confidence and trust. We still talk about the technology gap in terms of, access to phones, access to SIMs. Oftentimes, women may not have access to their own phone. Somebody may be taking it out to use all day and she doesn't have access to it. Lack of mobility and time poverty, right? So, she's not able to go to, the access point to transact. Then we have, barriers at the institution level, right? So I'm talking about the providers of these services. Oftentimes, there are inherent biases and perceptions that women are not a viable customer segment. And therefore, they're not looking at, financial institutions are not looking at gender disaggregated data to really understand this customer base, what their needs are, and their behaviors, right? How are they transacting on your platform today? And this then, has the knock-on effect of, lack of gender focus in the actual design and delivery of the product to, meet the pain points that I just talked about. Finally, then you have the ecosystem barriers, right? So, in a lot of markets, we still see discriminatory laws and practices that prevent women's full economic participation. We still see lack of a uniform identification and a uniform digital identification these days that really enables her not only to access financial services, but the suite of social services, right? So education, other social services that girls and women might need. And then finally, you've got, poor connectivity and infrastructure in a lot of our markets. And so again, I tell this story a lot, but a few years ago, we were doing research in the Philippines, right? Philippines, a country of about 7,000 islands. And this woman was telling us, she was in Metro Manila and she was trying to send money back to her family in one of the rural areas. And she was saying, if that internet, that connectivity cuts out in the middle of the transaction. She's not certain whether the money has gone. Her family or, whoever's receiving the money on the other end, they're not certain where the money is and how they're going to get it. And and I mentioned, trust and confidence being one of the big barriers, already in a situation where, you're not fully trusting this new technology, new innovation, and then something like this happens, it's just going to erode that and then, basically kind of take her out of using this. She's not going to trust it anymore. So that's, one issue with infrastructure. The second issue, particularly when it comes to payments that we see, again, is the acceptance of payments in her day-to-day life, right? So again, we did some research a few years ago where we were looking at salary digitization, wage digitization. And they were saying, look, it's great if I get my salary, my biweekly or monthly salary in an account. But if, the merchants I transact with, the marketplace where I buy my groceries, my children's school, if none of these places, accept payments, accept that digital means of payment, then I am still forced to go to the ATM and transact, to withdraw the money and then transact in cash at the end of the day. And so I think, the ecosystem challenge is that too, is, how do you, it's not enough to digitally include her. It's also, you have to make sure that she's able to use it once she has the access, that it's actually useful to her where she needs it. So that's on the barriers. Now, quickly, I know we're tight on time, but quickly to your second point on why this is, important. I think we hit on, some of the, some of the issues in terms of, payments being that gateway. But I really think, we at Women's World Banking believe that financial inclusion is that pathway to women's economic empowerment, right? Giving women access to finance enables her to make stronger decisions to build security and prosperity for her family. But it also has reverberating effects for her community. Some studies show that by having women have control over their financial decisions, girls are 25% more likely to stay in school, increasing their earning potential. So it's that generational effect of, now you're increasing the earning potential of the daughter. But we don't just believe it's a social good, right? Financial inclusion is absolutely the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do, right? When you look at the business opportunity that's being left on the table, the business case, we see there's women lack access to credit to the tune of $1.7 trillion. You could have $2 trillion increase in deposits taken by financial institutions. So really, again, it's that, it's the business case as well for these financial institutions to serve this market. You're leaving an opportunity on the table. And finally, I think Jacqueline talked about this as well. Again, financial inclusion of the woman, it comes full circle to really drive global growth, right? So we see there was a study by McKinsey a few years ago that essentially said, if women were equal participants in the economy, you would increase global GDP by about $28 trillion in sort of the best case scenario. And so really, when you look at it, yes, it's absolutely the socially right thing to do, but it's also the business, there's also a business case for financial institutions. It's also the smart thing to do to drive economic growth, security, and prosperity.
Thank you so much, Nithya. Definitely a lot of food for thought there. And you talk about existing bias, lack of trust, data not being disaggregated, problems of connectivity, as barriers, and then this importance of economic empowerment for women, and the importance in terms of social goals, the social goal, and how it affects in terms of school, and but beyond that, I think it was very interesting what you were mentioning, that there is also a business case, that is made there for really promoting this kind of initiatives. Thank you so much, Nithya. I want to turn it to Camilo, because Camilo, at Better Than Cash Alliance, you work very closely with governments and policymakers. You advise them on how to build more inclusive financial systems, and you share experiences and learnings from other countries. So in your experience, what are some insights that you have gained on what can policymakers do to be more intentional on building payment systems that work for women?
Thank you very much, Xavier. It's great to be here, and thanks again to DFI for giving us the opportunity to be here with all of you. So, as you mentioned, the Alliance works with governments, but also with companies and international development organizations. And over the last couple of years, I mean, one of the things that I think we've seen is there's been actually, I'll start with the positive news. If we look at the Findex numbers from this last summer, there's been a massive increase actually in account ownership, right? 68% of women now in emerging countries actually have accounts. That's a 30% percentage point increase from 10 years ago. So it's a huge success. However, 740 million women still do not have accounts. And, as Nitya and Anna and Jacqueline mentioned, this has all these implications in terms of, financial independence and economic empowerment. And one of the things that we see is that, the risk of being excluded, and in the context also of economic recovery, COVID-19, food security, all these issues that are happening is really, really critical that we as the Alliance are supporting governments in making their payment strategies and all the work that they're doing on financial inclusion that is really focused on achieving gender equality to empower all women and girls. One thing that perhaps I wanted to raise is that over the last couple of years, we have worked very closely with the governments on developing a set of principles. We call them the UN principles for responsible digital payments. And these were developed over the last couple of years in response to a lot of the innovation actually that has happened in payments globally to ensure that providers, governments, companies, anyone who's involved in the payments value chain is launching payments in a way that actually addresses the needs of customers, and in many cases, of course, the needs of women, that their data is being protected, that there's clear recourse or redressal mechanisms. So there's trust basically in this payments platforms, and specifically when it comes to prioritizing women, which is actually one of the principles from the UN principles, we had identified various challenges, which I think also Nitya just touched upon, the issues around lack of connectivity, the issues around lack of digital identity or identity in general, of course, issues around financial capability, and of course, social and regulatory barriers. But at the same time, we also see a lot of governments are actually now recognizing the critical role that women have as the next billion users. And I hadn't heard the McKinsey figure, but I think it's such a fantastic figure. It's not just just a social imperative, but it actually makes business case to design, create, roll out products for women. And one other thing that I think is really important that we've learned over the last couple of years is that in order to do all these things, we need data. There is a lack of gender disaggregated data globally. Some countries are starting to move forward and doing some really innovative things. Chile, for example, has been doing this already in Latin America for the last couple of years. But there is an important step that I think we all need to take is to first advocate for the collection of sex disaggregated data, and to also work with the private sector, with governments, the central banks, to then actually use that data to be able then to drive policy making, as well as with the private sector, then for them to be able to use that data to understand actually the different segments. Sometimes, I look back at some previous experience that I had where, if you go and talk to a credit card company in a Western country, they can segment credit card products by age, profession, come up with a special product for women ages 30 to 35. Why is not that happening globally with segments for women in emerging economies? It should be, right? But in order to do that, we need a better understanding from the public sector and the private sector of the needs and the segments to be able to design better products that meet their needs.
Thank you so much, Camilo, for these insights. We have been talking quite a lot about data and the importance of having disaggregated data to analyze how we can improve these policies. So you also mentioned, Camilo, Findex, and the recent numbers that we have to show the progress in the last 3 years. From the demand side, we see that there we have some disaggregation by gender, so we can see some progress. We also have Ana Maria with us, that I think is one of the few regulators in Latin America that really has a ton of data disaggregated by gender. So where are we in terms of progress? Do you see some progress in terms of closing this gender gap? Should we be optimistic, or what's your take on where we are right now, looking back from where we are coming?
I totally agree with the other panelists in terms that we have been making such a good progress, and the pandemic brought this leapfrog effect in many emerging countries in terms of digital adoption and in terms of the usage of financial products. We saw a lot of emergency programs, G2P programs, also brought into the landscape, which helped and to bring this more dynamic, especially for the unbanked and for women in general. That was the case in Colombia with the program Ingreso Solidario, which is a special program that we designed during the pandemic to address the lockdown effects. It was targeted to 3 million households and beneficiary households. 63 of them were women, and we managed to bank around 1 million of them, and we have seen a lot of progress or a change in their behavior in terms of the not just in making digital payments through the wallets that were offered to them, but also in terms of savings and in terms of initiating that journey to really take advantage of financial inclusion much more in a more productive way. But that's one thing. The other thing I see that is also happening in a lot of emerging countries is the idea to actually deploy these fast payment systems or switches or rails, which I see that is really convenient and very helpful to the problem and challenge that Nithya was sharing with us about the ecosystem, because this is not just not the fact that we can actually bank women, but also that they can actually find a whole digital ecosystem around them. We already seen like around 50 or 60 countries having those fast payment rails already deployed with a lot of very good results. We have PIX in Brazil, we have UPI in India, we have got a lot of good stories and lessons coming up from a lot of countries. Again, emphasize the idea to design those rails together with the private sector to have this cooperation and collaboration in what exactly do we need to incorporate, what features do we need to bring in to make sure that those rails can actually work for everyone, that are accessible for everyone, that are interoperable, that are working really efficient for everyone. And the last thing I see that regulators, central banks or governments, whoever is putting the regulatory framework is the idea that we need to emphasize trust around all this technological change that we are seeing. We have a lot of fintech players, we have digital asset ecosystem, we have tons of new products, and they are really getting fast into the unbanked and reaching those unbanked, which is a good thing. But then also we need to make sure that we are having a very good customer protection, especially for women, and that we're making sure that they really understand what are the characteristics of those products, where are the potential losses, how can they protect themselves and bring trust around this new digital ecosystem.
Thank you. And following on that, how we will trust, because also Nithya was emphasizing that as a big barrier, the lack of trust in the physical world. I think that we have learned a little bit how financial institutions, what they can do in terms of building this trust, but especially for women with all these barriers that Nithya was describing, what will be like I don't know if call it like a best practice, but what we can do in terms of creating this digital trust?
I can jump.
Maybe Jacqueline, if you want to start, and maybe Nithya, you can jump in. Jacqueline, please.
Yeah, I think in terms of why there's already from the supply side or from other stakeholders, why there's a bias with even we've seen it in research in trying to understand why the woman is not picking up existing products. For example, there's a lot of focus in research on the cash in, cash out level, or the touch points, or the kinds of channels that women use, forgetting that, and this is something that emerging research is pointing out to, forgetting that there's a life beyond the channel, where there's a lot of things that women are doing, money management mechanisms at household level that we need to tap into. Because if, for instance, the digital financial tools that we have presented are clashing with the women's ways, the way of life, for instance, in terms of literacy, numeracy, mobility, etc., as we have seen, then there will be ultimately some decisions around, these formal instruments are not for me as a woman. Now, what needs to be done in terms of building this trust is to look at that household level. Already women are being celebrated, for example, in Africa for being champions of micro businesses. And at the same time, despite all odds, despite not having, the ability to own property, despite not having identity, means of identifying themselves, despite not owning, mobile phones and so on, they're doing significant things at household level for resilience, for survival. And once we begin to understand or appreciate or move or transition the society from just seeing women as those decision makers for minor financial money management mechanisms, and making them, appreciating what is happening at household level, we can begin to build solutions that really work for them. For example, tapping into the milestones for women, especially in the rural communities. For example, marriage is such a big thing. Another thing is childbirth. How come we're not tapping into these realities around women, especially in the low income segments? We would be able to build very many useful solutions for them, such that formal financial instruments can be useful. But before that is done, just relying on how they're able to connect with existing solutions, or how they're able to connect with the existing channels, that is cash in, cash out, for example, agent networks. I've seen a lot of research around that. I don't think it's enough in pushing the trust. Maybe the solutions that we're pushing are not speaking to their daily aha moments at the household level. So there's a lot of thinking that needs to go into, look, we can get a lot of gains in appreciating what is around them, their personal aspirations, these emotional moments in their lives, the type of support that they're getting from the communities, for example, their social circles, and so on. That way, I think we would be driving a lot of trust in formal financial instruments.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. You definitely have thought on that. And I saw that Nithya also had some thoughts to share with us on this.
Yeah, just picking up on a couple of points from what Jacqueline said. I think, what we have seen work is really a what we call the high-tech, high-touch model, right? In order to build trust, you still have to have that support system or that mechanism through which you're building that level of comfort with using this technology. You're building those digital and financial capabilities so that they actually understand, how do I actually use my phone? How do I actually see my balance deposits? How do I actually know that the money has gone? So one example of how we did that, we actually worked with factory workers in Bangladesh, garment factory workers in Bangladesh, to digitize again their salaries. And we employed a peer ambassador program where, those who maybe were a little bit more digitally savvy, within the factory floor, were able to, teach others, right? And it's that onboarding experience. It's making sure that, that first experience that the woman has with using technology is successful. So, that's one thing. So the peer ambassador program, women agent networks, we've seen that actually work in India as well as Nigeria, employing women agents to support women to make those transactions. So I think, that's, so those are some of the things that we've seen work, really making sure that you're building her digital financial capabilities, making sure that you're meeting her where she is, right? I think, Jacqueline, you talked about this a lot, going, if they're, in busy Lagos, they're a market trader, they're not going to have time to go to a kiosk that's a mile away, in the middle of the day when they're their busiest, making money, because that's what they're there for. They're entrepreneurs. So you have to, again, work within the systems that they have in order to to make sure that they are transacting and that they're building those secure those digital and financial capabilities that give them the confidence to use this technology.
Thank you so much, Nithya. Also, Ana Maria was mentioning about all the increase in digital payments in the recent years, no, in part due to the pandemic. Ana Maria was mentioning about the Ingreso Solidario program, and similar programs has been run in several other countries, no? So you think that this growth is here to stay, or do you see a risk of losing some of the progress made, no? Some of the programs that Camilo was talking when he mentioned about the Findex data, no? So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely want to celebrate the progress, right? I mean, again, when we look at the previous Findex data, the gender gap was 9%, and now it's 6%, right? So there has been progress, and we should celebrate that. But I think, this is not the moment to take our, foot off the gas, as we say, right? This is not the moment to let up, because I think, obviously, we're all optimistic, but I think it all depends on us, right? As the collective sort of community, whether this progress stays or whether we go backwards. Because I think this last 742 million women that are unbanked, and again, women's role banking, we don't just look at those who don't have accounts, we also look at usage, right? Because we want to make sure that it's not just checking the box on access, but it's also about using and making sure that you're building that habit. And there are still about 250 million women, so 250 million women that are inactive, right? That have accounts in name, but don't actually use them on a day-to-day basis. And these next billion women are going to be the most digitally excluded, the most difficult to reach. And so, this is the time to make sure that we as a global community come together, advocate, raise our voices, put our resources to make sure that we're reaching this last 742 million women and 250 million women who are inactive, and that we don't let this progress slide back. And that we are, again, those who did get accounts, all of these programs are really great to check the box on access. Now let's make sure that the women stay engaged with those, those accounts that were opened, that they actually use them to transact. And that goes back to some of the, topics that we were talking about, the ecosystem challenges. Now, can you make sure that she's able to use this, use the money to pay for all of her daily goods and services, and things like that. So I think, definitely optimistic, definitely celebrate the progress that's been made, but let's not take the foot off the gas, and let's make sure that we continue to stay as focused on this last, 742 million women as we were the last decade to close the gender gap by 3%.
I like that, Nithya. I like it's not time to celebrate now, no, recognizing progress, but still a lot of work to do. So we don't need to relax there. So any reactions, any other thoughts from the other panelists around all that we have been discussing?
Perhaps, Xavier, maybe. Oh, sorry, Jacqueline, go ahead.
Sorry, I think there are good things coming out of bad things from COVID-19. For example, of course, COVID brought about a surge in digital payments, but also a surge in digital fraud. And in response, you're seeing a number of central banks responding to, ensuring that they are either through collecting data around women and also using this data to design specialized, for example, consumer protection frameworks, and even looking to the specific of gender-based risk issues and so on. So I think with the continuing growth with digital, there's still going to be some positives coming out of the need to really stay grounded and look at the data and build upon this data to actually speak to the needs of women as regards financial inclusion. So yes, I think this growth is here to stay, and I think there are more lessons and more things, more positive things that are going to come out of the growth in digital, the growth in all aspects as regards data, and I mean, there's so much that we can do in analytics, in the forthcoming days.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for these insights. Camilo, you were also going to mention something here.
Yeah, thank you, Xavier. One of the things that I was going to mention is actually, the past couple of years, we've also worked with our colleagues at Women's World Banking and UNSGSA, as well as UN Women and the World Bank on a global call to action called Reaching Financial Equality, which is basically a 10-point action plan for governments and businesses to basically rebuild stronger after COVID by really prioritizing basically women's digital financial inclusion. And, these global commitments that were launched, by our partners and have also been fed onto the G20 Saudi president's paper last year. They were all endorsed basically by ministries of finance. And what's interesting about it is that a lot of the recommendations that we've already been talking about over the last half hour or so, including hiring more women, both at agents and at leadership positions within financial institutions, digitizing, government payments, collecting sex disaggregated data, working to leverage actually e-commerce platforms for businesses. All these are actions that we now basically have to then take on forward, right, and help work with the private sector and public sector to implement. To me, from our experience, we obviously have worked a lot over the years, including with Anna and the government of Colombia on digitizing government transfers and wages, as well as Nitya mentioned in the context of the ready-made garment sector as in Bangladesh. And all these use cases that provide an on-ramp, right, into financial inclusion, I think are critical. But we know that it's not enough. I think Nitya really nailed it on the head in the sense that we have so many accounts that are still inactive, and we need to be able to drive usage to those accounts. And in order to do that, then we need to make sure that products are being designed that meets those needs. And importantly as well, in many markets, there's still some core infrastructure issues around the costs, around interoperability, that then hinder actually the ability to be able to actually make payments seamlessly, which is why I think the work that Anna is doing on faster payments and other governments around the world are doing on rolling out faster payments is so important, because it can really drive scale, volumes, reduce costs, and actually then make those payments accessible to large parts of the population. Jacqueline, I know also with African ENDA, this is part of the core focus of the work that you're doing, and it'll be really exciting to see the work that you'll be doing over the next couple of years in Africa to really drive the scale up of faster payments, and to that then can help all of us reach financial equality.
Thank you so much, Camilo, for that. You were mentioning now fast payments, interoperability. That is something that also Ana Maria touched on that before. What do you think about that? About the importance of interoperability? I think that we tend to think about interoperability of something good in general, but there is also some issues in terms of the timing when you need to promote this interoperability to be sure that you don't go against competition and you don't interfere with the business case that the institutions could have on that. I don't know if Ana Maria or anybody else have some thoughts on that.
Many, Xavier, because we have been dealing with exactly the point that you are highlighting, in terms that we need to make sure this is a principle, this is a public goal, in terms to make sure that those rails and the payment infrastructure is interoperable. We cannot have these closed loop systems. Why? Because although they might be a very excitement from the business case standpoint, at the end, this is not going to be a solution that works for everyone in every corner, in every municipality in the country. So definitely we do need that interoperability feature in the rails, so that we can have a very inclusive landscape, a very competitive landscape, so that we can see the incumbents, but also fintechs, this new type of payment savers providers to jump into the digital industry and payment industry and deploy new features, new innovations, and so on. So yes, definitely, that's the way that's the role of authorities in making sure that that public goal is accomplished. But then at the same time, making sure that the business case can flourish and that can, providers can really be here and stay here for the long time.
Thank you, Ana Maria. We are just entering the last 5 minutes of the panel. So I don't know if there is any last minute, in this time that we have, last remarks that you have or something that you want to highlight before I jump to some other of the questions that we have prepared for you guys.
Yeah, maybe one last thing from a regulator perspective, in terms that all of these challenges that we have been discussing, it brings a lot of challenges from the institutional capacities of a regulator. We need new approaches to understand those challenges and to address them. So we need to embrace, a sandbox or innovation hubs, or even the collaboration approach. The way that we dialogue with the industry needs to change, really, to really understand the needs of the market, to understand the needs of customers, and to come up with a more robust, but at the same time, enabling framework. So this is a call for regulators to have or try new approaches. I definitely think we also have those challenges from the institutional standpoint.
Thank you so much, Ana Maria. Jacqueline, Nithya, Camilo, do you have any last thoughts for our audience?
I think for me, it's to just encourage stakeholders to embrace behavioral science research, to move this conversation to actually the household level, especially for low-income segments, to understand what needs are there, what are their pain points really, and build from that. I just mentioned earlier that, there's a lot that is happening. The woman is being celebrated at that level and at all levels, but we're just not building around all these aha moments. So I think behavioral science can go a long way, and we're beginning to see this helping in terms of designing, whether it's processes or even just customized solutions, as opposed to just talking about financial education and pushing this when the tools actually don't speak to the lives of these women. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Camilo, Nithya, anything else to add here?
I think the one last thing no, please, Camilo, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Nithya.
I was just going to say the last point I'll add is, as much as we want to innovate and to put all these new technologies out there, I think, panelists had talked about this already, but really honing in on that customer protection and transparency, and making sure that you have those mechanisms to protect the customer at the end of the day. And also to make sure that the customer, the low-income woman at the end of the day, knows where she can go to get support when something does happen. Because invariably, we've all experienced this in our own lives using technology. Something's going to go wrong, and that's okay. But making sure that, those support mechanisms are there, that, she knows who to call or where to go to get those issues resolved, and that those issues are resolved in its basic sort of customer service, right? You want to make sure that she feels that, she's got that safety net, so to speak, or that, those resources available to her to address issues that come up. When there's a missed payment, where does she go? When, there's an issue with connectivity, how can she make sure that her money is secure? So I just don't want to, lose sight of that piece of this as well, to make sure that the transparency and protection are embedded as we think about innovation and moving things forward.
Thank you, Nithya. And Camilo, maybe some final thoughts here?
Yeah, no, for me, I'll just reinforce the importance of the lack of gender disaggregated data. It really hinders our ability to clearly actually define and scope the problems, and prevents us from making the issue visible to decision makers. So it's really important that us as leaders in the industry, policymakers, regulators, to really have a gender sensitive approach to, really embed this onto the economic, financial, social indicators that drive policy making, and to really work, between the public and private collaboration to leverage that data to then, drive this agenda forward.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time for this session. But Ana Maria, Jacqueline, Nithya, Camilo, it has been great to have you with us, sharing your insights on inclusive payments and how they can work better for women. We look forward, as always, to having the chance to work with you again soon. in the future. And audience, thank you for your attention. We are reaching the end of this 3-day summit. Still a couple of sessions remaining, so I'm looking forward to the rest of it, and I hope to see you there too. So goodbye for now, and again, thank you so much.